So I'd like you to put your hands together for Dr. Christian Jardine from Joju Solar. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me over here to speak to you. I'm going to give you an overview of solar PV for businesses and to share with you the business case. As mentioned, I'm Technical Director of Joju Solar. I'm also a Senior Researcher at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute. I'm not saying that to show off or be boastful, but during the panel session earlier, Donald did mention to be very wary of people presenting stuff to you that seemed too good to be true. I'm about to present to you some stuff that seems too good to be true, and I would like to put my university hat behind those numbers. So I'm going to start off with some wild assumptions about you in the room. I don't know a lot about you, but these are the assumptions that I'm making. First of all, you've never heard of us. That you're likely, as manufacturers, to have large spaces, large roof spaces. Those roof spaces are likely to be metal roofs, such as Kingspan. And that because you're involved in manufacturing, your electricity costs are a major component of your overall running costs. And that in the current environment of rising electricity costs, that is proving to be painful. I'd also like to assume that actually you're quite used to spending quite large chunks of money on bits of capital equipment that give you long-term operational and cost benefits, and therefore, unlike many business audiences that I talk to, actually the idea of investing in solar panels might be easier for you than for other institutions, and we may well have seen that by the impressive number of hands that were just raised. But we also acknowledge that you have businesses to run and that solar might be seen as somewhat tangential and that the decisions that where you put your capital has to be balanced against other business costs. So I'll hopefully come back and address these themes as we go through the talk. I'll kick off just by telling you a little bit about Joju Solar. So we were founded back in 2006. We're one of the old timers in the industry, having been around long before governments introduced feed-in tariffs. We're now up to around about 100 staff nationwide, and we're increasingly recognised as being one of the best in the game in terms of the awards that we've been winning. The space that we operate in, we actually cover three complementary technologies: solar panels, battery storage, and electric vehicle charge points. The piece I'm talking to you about today is really just that top component, the solar panel only component. Batteries are likely to be not relevant for you. EV might come into the game in terms of providing access for your staff and visitors to charge up in the future, but this is really just about solar panels. And I'll just show you some pictures of some of our work. More than 250 solar schools installed. This is the sort of installation that we'll be looking at for you kind of guys, I think. Big metal roofs. This is Geraint Thomas Velodrome in Wales. Also another similar big metal roof here. This is the Wales Millennium Centre down in Cardiff. And also various bits of bespoke architecture that our commercial team undertake. So let's get to this is my last one. Salisbury Cathedral, not relevant for you, but it's beautiful, so I just thought I'd show you that. Let's get to the nitty-gritty. What can solar power do for you? So the size of a solar panel system is measured in what's called its kilowatt peak capacity. 1 kilowatt peak is around about 7 meters squared. And if you look at the energy production, that obviously varies depending on where you are in the country. But if you're in London, 1 kilowatt peak, that is 7 meters squared, will be producing you around about 900 kilowatt hours per year. So if we look at that on a sort of per meter squared basis, every square meter of roof space could be generating you around about 130 kilowatt hours of electricity per year, and at a cost of around about 22 pence at the moment for electricity. That would be basically providing you benefits of around about £30 per square metre per year. So you can start to do that little calculation in your head and look at that kind of unused asset that you have sitting there in terms of roof space, and you start to get an idea of the amount of financial benefit that you could get from solar panels. People also think, what about orientation? Actually, there's a very, very big hotspot of orientation. Obviously, the most optimal is south-facing. It's pitched at around about 30 degrees. But actually, because we're getting a lot of light from the sky, not just from the sun, actually, that's quite soft in terms of its orientation effects. And metal roofs, which are pitched at around about 5 degrees, probably going to be producing you 95% of optimal, pretty much whichever way that they are facing. What it means is that pretty well any building, no matter how it's orientated, is going to have some aspect that is well suited to solar energy production. This is in terms of the build. I mentioned Kingspan roofs earlier. This is by far the cheapest and simplest way of installing solar panels. You basically screw these little clips into the high profile of the trapezoidal roof sheet. They've got a little rubber membrane on the back to help keep it waterproof. And then you can see the clips running down the roof. You just simply go down panel, 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 panel. Very, very quick and easy to install. Other metal roofs, standing seams, you can do something very, very similar there, where you just clip around the seam and then mount the panel onto that clip. So again, very, very quick, very, very simple way of doing that. And the last roof type that might be relevant to you would be flat roofs. Here you would mount the panels on triangular frames. Those would be ballasted down because you don't want to penetrate into a flat roof. I'm sure you'd be very worried about water leakage given that you're dealing with cardboard boxes inside. So these are just ballasted down. And there's a couple of different ways of doing that, but flat roof space. A little bit more expensive, but is also well utilisable for electricity generation. So I'm sure what you really want to know about is the economics of solar PV at the commercial scale. And what we've seen is this sort of very long-term trend in cost reduction of solar panels over the last 30, 40 years. The price has come down from $76 a watt down to probably about 20 pence a watt. So, that's an absolutely huge decrease. And even those of you, early movers that might have looked at this back in 2010, the price has probably come down 10, 15-fold even since 2010 in terms of the panel prices. And we'd expect to see those learning curves continuing and solar to get cheaper and cheaper as time goes on. So we've seen these big reductions in price, mainly from mass production, mainly from Chinese manufacturers being able to produce product very, very cheaply. But actually all the components in a solar PV system have got cheaper over that time as solar panels have been deployed at scale. And we're actually getting better at building stuff as well. So we're showing some sort of institutional learning as well. This is a 50 kilowatt installation. The very first one we did took 2 weeks for us to build, whereas those panels were all laid out in a day and the whole system was completed and wired in within 3 days. So it just shows you, how efficient the industry is getting overall. So basically, the economics of solar is solar's getting cheaper and cheaper, and the cost of conventional electricity generation is getting more expensive, and that implies that at some point there will be a crossover where solar power actually becomes cheaper than getting electricity from the grid in the normal way. And I think you can argue that that cost parity point has already been reached quite comprehensively in the UK. Certainly when we're looking at solar PV on buildings, I would say solar PV is now the cheapest way of providing electricity to a building. Let me just talk you through an example of how that might work. So I'm going to give you an example of a 100 kilowatt solar PV roof. So that would be around about 700 metres squared of roof space. That would cost around about £70,000 to install. and it would generate maybe 85,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per year. If you run the numbers through on that, over the 25-year warranted lifetime of those solar panels, they will be producing electricity at around about 3.2 pence per kilowatt hour. So that compares very, very favourably to historic prices of electricity, which would have been around about 10 pence per kilowatt hour. I'm kind of intrigued what prices you guys are paying. So put your hands up if you're paying between 10 and 15 pence per kilowatt hour. If you know, there's one over at the back. 15 to 20? A few. 20 to 25? I'm expecting more here, because this is where the government's commercial price cap is sitting. 25 to 30? Some over here. More than 30. Who's paying more than 30? It's got some people paying more than 30p, okay, for their electricity. The rest of you I'm going to have as don't knows, okay? But for the gentleman paying 30p, and the solar power is generating at 3p, you can see that is just massively, massively cheaper than buying electricity from conventional sources, and that would equate to around about a 2.5-year payback at the sorts of prices that you're paying. So at the moment, when we're at a time of very, very high electricity prices, you know, the cost of solar panels is looking very, very attractive economically if you can take a long-term view over what you're doing. So yes, you can get electricity at 3 pence per kilowatt hour. What's the catch? Why isn't everyone doing this? Well, the answer is when you're buying solar panels, a product that lasts 25 years, you're essentially buying, in that £70,000 cost, you're essentially buying 25 years worth of electricity all in one go. And that sort of upfront cost is obviously the tricky part, the barrier, and you'd have to make a decision about whether it is worthwhile doing that. I think with electricity prices where they are at the moment, when they're very, very high, actually you could see that pay back very, very quickly. And it's also worth noting that that 3 pence is essentially fixed once you've bought it. So all that volatility that we're seeing causing such havoc for many businesses around the country, you're also hedged against that volatility by fixing a chunk of your prices with solar. I mentioned this issue of upfront costs. And I do realise that that's clearly going to be a barrier for many people. And if you've got that sort of money sitting around in your bank account, well, you'd probably invest in new staff or new production machinery. You've got these other pressures on what to do with your business. So I wanted to share with you, last of all, perhaps another option, a way of doing this without investing your own capital. And the approach that we've taken is essentially a third-party funded approach, where we actually work with community energy groups to source the finance rather than essentially city money. So we've actually been pioneers in the community energy space. We installed the very, very first community energy project in the UK. And since then, we've installed around about 10% of all community renewables in the UK. And all of that is solar on buildings, no solar farms, no wind farms. But actually 10% of that we've managed to do across buildings. This is how the community energy model works. So the central part of that would be a community energy group. They raise money from shareholder investors within their local community who provide them with the capital, and they get a return of about 5% a year on the money that they put into that co-op. The co-op will then put the solar panels up on a host building, such as the ones that you might own, and would then sell you that electricity at a subsidised rate. And that provides the community group with their investment coming back, and it provides you with the bill savings. And then that usually generates some additional funds that can also be used for beneficial projects elsewhere within the community. So if you compared a straight purchase solar PV scheme with a third-party funded scheme, then straight purchase is going to be more profitable for you in the longer term, but it does require that upfront capital investment in year zero. whereas a third-party funding system is less profitable in the long term, but you're never in debt to the solar panels that would be sited on your roof. This is an example of how we've worked with businesses to run community energy projects. So the M&S Energy Society used exactly this funding model to put solar panels on the roof of about 10 M&S supermarkets. And the community of investors was actually M&S's own staff and pension holders. So it was kind of nicely wrapped up there, and M&S certainly saw, as well as the cost benefits of using a community energy model, they obviously saw this sort of engagement CSR benefits of running this kind of scheme and engaging with communities in that way. So I'll leave you with this. Economics of solar PV at the moment is crazy at the moment. We're seeing paybacks typically 3 to 5 years, and then obviously after that point you're in profits. Your properties are likely to be ideal for solar. Large metal roofs, cheapest way of putting solar panels up, all orientations likely to be well suitable for electricity generation. For those of you that are interested in investing your own capital, I think it's actually quite well aligned with the way that you do things already in terms of the other bits of plant that you purchase. But if that's not for you, then obviously this finance package is also a possibility. So if you are interested in learning more, having a look at a project, we're more than happy to scope those out for you. So do get in touch. Thank you very much.